I still remember the sound of the fork hitting the edge of my plate when everything stopped. It was Christmas Eve, and my mother had outdone herself. The table was perfectly set with porcelain plates she never used except for holidays, candles lined up like soldiers, the smell of cinnamon and roasted ham thick in the air. Every chair was filled. My uncle, aunt, a few cousins, Emily, Daniel, my fiancé. My mother sat at the head of the table wearing her pearl earrings and that forced smile she used whenever she wanted to look like the perfect matriarch. She had planned this dinner like a performance, and just like every performance, there was a script in her mind. I just didn't know yet that I was about to tear it apart without saying a word. Daniel was telling a story about our engagement. He has a warm voice, steady, the kind that makes people lean in. He mentioned my promotion at work, a small thing, a good thing. But the way my mother's jaw tightened told me everything. Her fingers wrapped tighter around the stem of her wine glass, and she didn't blink. When Daniel said with that proud smile of his, "Caro got the promotion. She's brilliant," my mother's lips curved into something between a smile and a snarl. It was the kind of expression I'd grown up with, a signal, a warning. The room felt warmer, or maybe my body just knew what was coming. She turned to me with that calm voice that hides the storm. "Why didn't you tell me she asked?" I said softly. "Because it just happened last week." She laughed, the fake light sound that makes everyone else relax but makes me brace. Then she said, "Of course it did. Of course you didn't tell me." People shifted in their seats. Daniel reached for my hand under the table. Warm, grounding. I squeezed back, pretending that was enough. Then her eyes landed on the ring, the engagement ring. Simple, gold. It had never looked like a threat to anyone before, but to her it might as well have been a knife. Her smile froze. "You think this is love?" she said, not loud, just sharp. Then louder. "You think this is love?" Emily looked down at her plate. No one spoke. And then my mother reached across the table. Her hand grabbed mine, fast and cold. Her nails dug into my skin as she pulled my hand up in front of everyone. The candles flickered with the movement. "You let a man ruin you," she said. My breath stuck in my throat. She twisted the ring hard, trying to rip it off my swollen finger. Pain shot through me. I whispered, "Mom, stop!" But she wasn't listening. She was never listening. She screamed, "He ruined you! He ruined my daughter!" Her voice cracked through the room like breaking glass. The fork fell from someone's hand. I heard the sharp ping as it hit the floor. Emily came behind me, and instead of pulling our mother away, she held my shoulders down, like I was the one who needed controlling, like she always had. My mother's grip got tighter. I could feel the metal cutting into my skin. Daniel moved fast, his chair scraping against the wood floor. "Let go of her," he said, but my mother yanked harder. My finger turned purple. The candles wavered again. My aunt murmured something, but no one moved. Not one person. That was the part that hurt more than the ring cutting my skin. The silence. The complicity. I looked around the table and saw the same expression I had seen my entire life. Don't make it worse. Don't make her angrier. Just take it. Just swallow it. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Daniel reached for her wrist, but she jerked away like a cornered animal. "She's mine," my mother hissed. That was the real sentence. Not the one about Daniel, the one that stripped everything bare. In her mind, I was still a child who belonged to her. I felt the room blur a little, not because I was weak, but because part of me understood in that moment that this was it. The line, the break. She shouted again, "He's ruining you! You are not my daughter anymore!" Then something shattered. A glass. A sound that ripped through the tension. Red wine spilled across the white tablecloth like blood spreading. Daniel grabbed her wrist and forced her hand off mine. My finger burned where the ring had dug in. My mother's eyes were wide, not from shame, but from fury. Pure, controlled fury. Everyone stared. No one said a word. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not explain. I just sat there with my hand throbbing and the taste of metal in my mouth. The world had shifted without a single word from me. That was the moment I understood that silence was not surrender. It was a line being drawn. When people ask me why I stayed so quiet for so long, I wish they could step into the house I grew up in for just one day. There were no locks on the bedroom doors because privacy was never something we were allowed to have. My mother liked to say, "There's nothing you should ever need to hide from me." At the time, it sounded like love. Later, I understood it was ownership. From as early as I can remember, Margaret was the sun, and we were expected to orbit around her. Every morning was the same. She would walk down the hallway with her slippers making that soft swish against the wood floor. Emily and I would sit up straight before she even reached our door. We learned early that hesitation meant punishment. Not the kind that leaves bruises, but the kind that makes you wish it did. A look, a word, a prayer forced through clenched teeth. When we were little, she made us practice wife lessons. That's what she called it. Every Saturday morning, she'd make us stand in front of the hallway mirror and rehearse lines like, "Yes, whatever you say, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you." She'd correct our posture, our tone, even the way our hands folded in our laps. We were not little girls. We were rehearsing for a part in a play we never auditioned for, and she was the director. Church was her favorite stage. She would hold Emily's hand in mine like we were trophies. We wore matching dresses and bows that made us look like dolls. If I ever fidgeted even a little, she'd squeeze my hand so hard my fingers would ache for hours. After every sermon, she'd whisper reminders into my ear. A good woman is obedient. A good woman keeps her family together. A good woman doesn't embarrass her mother. At first, I tried. I tried to be the good daughter she wanted, but the bar kept moving. The better I behaved, the higher she raised it. Emily was the golden one. She learned how to nod, how to smile, how to fold herself perfectly into the role Margaret built. She was praised for her soft voice, her calm demeanor, her willingness to agree. I was the problem. I asked questions. Why do I have to wear the same dress? Why can't I go to Sarah's birthday party? Why can't I cut my hair? Why can't I say no? Questions were dangerous in our house. Questions meant you didn't love her enough. Questions meant punishment, and punishment often came in silence. She wouldn't yell, not at first. She would ignore me, walk past me like I wasn't there. At 7 years old, being invisible to your own mother is a particular kind of pain that never really fades. She'd let it stretch for days sometimes until I finally broke down and begged for forgiveness for something I didn't even understand. Then came the prayers. She'd kneel us in the living room, hands folded tight, her voice calm and holy, while mine shook. "God help my daughter learn obedience," she'd say. Emily's prayers were always clean. Mine were desperate. Every decision I made as a child was filtered through the single question, "What will Mom do if I don't obey?" There was a time I thought she was protecting us. That was the story she told. The world is dangerous. I need to keep you safe. But safe really meant controlled. It meant she decided who my friends were, what clothes I wore, how I spoke. Even the way I laughed sometimes made her frown. I remember one Christmas when I was 10, she caught me reading a book I'd borrowed from a neighbor. It wasn't anything inappropriate. It was just a book about a girl who ran away to New York to become a painter. She snatched it out of my hands, ripped it down the spine, and said, "Girls like you don't run away. Girls like you build families." I still remember the sound of the pages tearing. That was the night I stopped leaving books under my pillow. I started learning how to hide things differently. She made Emily and me attend every church event, every dinner, every function, dressed exactly how she approved. If I smiled too brightly at someone, she'd say I was being inappropriate. If I looked too quiet, she'd accuse me of being ungrateful. There was no right way to be me, only the way she designed. And it wasn't just the control over actions. It was the control over feelings. If I cried, she'd say I was being dramatic. If I was quiet, she'd say I was being disrespectful. She built an entire world where I was always wrong and she was always right. And the worst part is, as a child, I believed her. You believe your mother. You believe her because that's what survival looks like when you're small. You learn to make yourself smaller so she won't break you down again. She loved to say, "When I die, you'll thank me for raising you right." I used to repeat those words in my head like a prayer. I thought I was being shaped into someone strong. But what she was really shaping was silence. A silence that followed me through school, through college, into my career. A silence that felt like loyalty, but was actually fear. Even now, sitting here as an adult, remembering that house, I can still hear her voice in the walls. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It lived in me like a rule book I never got to rewrite. The first time I ever tried to push back against my mother's control, I was 16 and full of the kind of hope that only lasts a few hours before it's crushed. I remember the letter on my desk, the one from the university summer program out of state. It wasn't even full college yet, just a few weeks away from home, but it felt like air. Like a door opening to a world that wasn't designed by her. I held that letter in my hands like it was fragile glass. I didn't tell her right away. I carried it around, folded in the pocket of my jeans, for 2 days, feeling it burn against my leg like a secret. I told Emily first. She stared at me wide-eyed and whispered, "You know she's never going to let you go." But she didn't tell Mom. She just looked at me with something that might have been fear or envy. Maybe both. The night I finally showed her, she was sitting at the kitchen table with her Bible open. She liked to keep it there like a judge sitting at the bench. I placed the letter down gently in front of her. She read the first line and went still. Not loud, not furious. Still. That was always worse. She closed the Bible with a soft thud. "Why would you even apply to this?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but her knuckles were white. "Because I want to learn," I said. I didn't say escape, but I thought it. She leaned forward and said slowly, "Caro, we don't run away from family. We don't abandon the people who love us." Her eyes glistened in that practiced way that always made me doubt myself. I tried to hold my ground. "It's just a few weeks," I said. "I'll be back." She shook her head like I'd confessed a crime. "If you leave, you won't come back the same. You'll think you don't need me. You'll think you're better." She reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. To anyone else, it would have looked like a loving gesture, but I felt the iron grip beneath the softness. "If you leave," she whispered, "you'll break me. I don't know if I can live without my girls." The words landed like stones in my chest. I'd heard them before, 100 little variations. Guilt was her favorite weapon because it didn't leave bruises. It just rewired your sense of right and wrong. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and imagined what the world looked like outside this house. I imagined waking up and breathing without calculating every move. I imagined not having to apologize for wanting something of my own. But when the morning came, I folded the letter back into my drawer. Not because I didn't want to go, because she made me believe that if I left, she might die and it would be my fault. I carried that guilt like it was stitched into my skin. A week later, she brought it up in front of our church group. We were sitting in a circle the way we always did on Wednesday evenings, pretending that all our lives were picture perfect. She smiled and said Caro thought she could go off on her own for the summer, but she remembered what matters. The group chuckled a soft approving sound. I felt my face burn. It wasn't just that she'd told them. It was that she turned my dream into a joke, into proof that she had tamed me. After the meeting, one of the church ladies patted my arm and said, "Good girl, family comes first." I smiled like I was supposed to. Inside, something small cracked. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I didn't. Because in that world, rebellion was a sin. Disobedience was betrayal. And the worst punishment wasn't her yelling. It was that silence. The next day, she didn't talk to me at all. She moved through the house as if I were air. The silence was cold and sharp. By day 3, I found myself whispering apologies just to make it stop. I said sorry for wanting something, sorry for applying, sorry for breathing differently than she wanted me to. She hugged me and said, "That's my good girl." And I let her, because I thought this was what love looked like. Years later, I'd understand that wasn't love. That was control dressed in devotion. But back then, I only knew the warmth of being accepted after being frozen out. So I stayed. I stayed and told myself I'd leave one day, but not yet. Not until I was strong enough. But the truth is, no one is ever strong enough under that kind of control. You don't break out in a single moment. You survive in silence until something snaps. When the acceptance letter for college came, I didn't show it to her right away. I sat on the bus after school and read the lines over and over, the words blurring a little from how hard I was gripping the paper. It wasn't just acceptance, it was a scholarship. Full tuition, housing, everything. It wasn't just an invitation to study, it was a door out. For a week, I hid that letter under my mattress and memorized every line. It was the first secret that didn't feel like shame. It felt like oxygen. When I finally told her she was standing at the kitchen counter slicing apples, she froze mid-cut. Her hand didn't shake, but I saw the way her shoulders went rigid. "Boston," she repeated like the city itself was a sin. I nodded. She set the knife down very gently, like she was trying not to break the world in half. "You can't go," she said flatly. "You have responsibilities here." Responsibilities meant her. It meant church dinners, Bible groups, being the second pair of hands in her perfect little house. I said quietly, "I got a scholarship." Her jaw tightened. "We'll figure something else out. A local school. You can stay home." She made it sound like compromise, but it wasn't. It was the same cage, just with a nicer lock. "I'm going," I said. It came out small but solid. For a second, I thought she would scream. But she didn't. She laughed. It was sharp and brittle and full of disbelief. "You think you can survive without me?" she said. "You think the world out there cares about you?" she cried that night. Loud theatrical sobs that carried through the house. Emily sat on my bed with her knees pulled to her chest, whispering, "She'll never forgive you." I whispered back, "I know." But I also knew that if I didn't leave now, I never would. The morning I packed, she stood at my doorway, arms crossed. She didn't offer to help. She didn't stop me either. She just stared like she was carving this moment into something she could use later. "You'll come back," she said softly. Not as a hope, as a threat. I left anyway. The first night in Boston felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. The air smelled different. No one knew me. No one expected me to kneel or apologize. I lay on a twin bed in a dorm room with bare walls and a view of a cracked parking lot, and I cried harder than I ever had. Not because I wanted to go back, but because I didn't know who I was without her voice in my ear. I'd been trained to move to her rhythm. Without it, the silence was terrifying. But it was mine. The first week I called Emily twice. She whispered in the phone so Mom wouldn't hear. "She's telling everyone you abandoned the family," she said. I could hear the fear in her voice. I told her I loved her. I didn't say, "Come with me." She wouldn't have. Margaret sent me emails every day at first. Some were sweet, some were angry. All of them ended with some version of "come home." When that didn't work, she called. When I stopped answering, she sent people from church to check in on me. They'd leave messages about how much she missed me, how worried she was. It didn't matter that I was studying, working, building something for myself. To her, I was a runaway, a sinner, a problem to solve. But every day I stayed away, the grip loosened just a little. I learned how to cook cheap pasta and drink burnt coffee at midnight. I learned how to walk down streets she'd never touched. I learned how to breathe without her name attached to it. Daniel came years later after I'd built the first fragile layers of my life. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't need me to shrink. When I said no, he listened. When I said yes, he respected it. He was the first person who made silence feel safe. But even then, Margaret's voice lingered like an echo in the back of my head. She called on every holiday, sent letters with Bible verses written in her neat handwriting. She'd end every message the same way. "I'm your mother, you'll come back." They always do. And even when I hung up the phone or deleted the email, my hands would shake a little, because part of me had been raised to believe she was right, that I'd never really escape. But the longer I stayed gone, the louder my own voice became. It wasn't loud, but it was mine. The phone calls started 3 days after I posted a simple photo on social media. It wasn't anything special, just me and Daniel at the park. my hand resting on his shoulder, the ring catching the sunlight. I should have known it would find its way back to her. It always did. Margaret didn't yell the first time. She didn't have to. Her voice was calm, slow, calculated. "So you're engaged now," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. I could hear the sound of the kitchen clock ticking behind her, the same clock that used to dictate every minute of my childhood. "Yes," I said, my fingers tightening around the phone. "Daniel asked me, and I said yes." She laughed, that brittle sound that made me feel like I was 12 again and had just done something terribly wrong. "Of course you did," she said. "You always did have a way of disappointing me. I could have hung up. I should have hung up. But part of me still wanted her approval, a piece of me I hadn't fully scraped off yet." The next day, the first work call came. My manager called me into his office, his expression polite but strained. "We received a call from someone claiming to be your mother," he said carefully. "She said she's concerned about your safety. She mentioned your fiancé." My stomach twisted. What did she say? I asked, even though I already knew. That he's controlling you, that you're being isolated, that you're not, well. He didn't say crazy, but it was hanging in the air like smoke. I handed him my phone, showed him Daniel's texts about dinner plans, weekend hikes, grocery lists, normal things. He nodded uncomfortable, but he had to file a report anyway. HR procedure. I left his office with the weight of her shadow pressed against my chest again. Then came the second call. My neighbor, Mrs. Ellis, caught me by the elevator with her kind eyes clouded by concern. "Your mother called me," she said. "She said she's worried, said Daniel doesn't let you talk to anyone." "Sweetheart, if you ever need help." Her hand hovered like she was ready to save me from a story my mother had already written. I smiled weakly and told her everything was fine, but inside, something cracked. She wasn't just calling me now. She was building a world around me. A story where I was the victim and she was the saint. She had always been good at this. Her voice could weave guilt and righteousness together like a sermon. Within a week, my inbox was full of messages, church people, old neighbors, even a woman I barely knew from my high school choir. All of them telling me they were praying for me. I hadn't seen most of them in years, but somehow my engagement had become her battleground. Daniel tried to stay calm. He'd sit beside me on the couch while I read the messages, his hand warm on my knee. "We can block her," he said. "We can get a restraining order if she pushes it." I nodded, but I wasn't ready yet. It was still my mother. Still the woman who used to braid my hair and tell me that everything she did was for my own good. But she wasn't stopping. One night, after work, I picked up the phone out of sheer exhaustion. She didn't say hello. She went straight into it. "Do you know what people are saying about you?" she asked. "They think you've lost yourself. They think he's brainwashing you," I said quietly. "No one thinks that. You're the one saying it." She hissed through the line like something feral. "I'm your mother. People listen to me. They know I love you. They'll believe me before they believe some man who wants to own you." My breath caught. She said it like a threat because it was one. If she couldn't control me directly, she'd make sure everyone else saw me the way she wanted. She called my boss again. HR sent another email. "We're required to check in. Your mother has contacted the company twice this week." I sat in the empty conference room after that call and stared at the city lights outside the window. I'd spent years building a quiet life brick by fragile brick, and she was dismantling it from hundreds of miles away with nothing more than a phone and a story. Emily called once during that week. Her voice was low. "She's not sleeping. She's calling everyone. She says you're being controlled." I asked softly. "Do you believe her?" Emily didn't answer. She just breathed. That silence was answer enough. Daniel came home one night to find me sitting in the dark with the phone in my hand, listening to one of her voicemails on repeat. Her voice was calm at first, almost sweet. "I forgive you," she said. "I know you're not thinking clearly. I know he's making you say these things." Then it turned sharp. "But I will not lose you. You're mine." Daniel took the phone gently from my hand, saved the voicemail, and set it down. "This isn't just drama," he said. "This is escalation." That word landed hard. Escalation. He was right. She wasn't just angry. She was preparing for war. That night, we decided to document everything. Every voicemail, every email, every call. We didn't say it out loud, but we both knew this wasn't going to stop on its own. People like my mother don't let go. They tighten their grip until someone bleeds. The knock on the door came just after midnight. It wasn't polite or hesitant. It was firm and official. Daniel and I froze for a moment, staring at each other. No one visits at that hour without a reason. He went to the door, looked through the peephole, and whispered, "It's the police." My stomach dropped. When he opened the door, 2 officers stood in the hallway under the harsh fluorescent light. Their expressions were tired, professional, like they'd done this too many times. "We received a wellness call," the older one said. "Someone reported that you might be in danger." The younger one added, "Your mother, ma'am." Of course it was. Of course it was her. I stood in the doorway barefoot in an oversized t-shirt, feeling exposed under their steady gaze. Daniel spoke calmly. "She's done this before. She's trying to harass us." The older officer sighed softly, like this wasn't the first time he'd heard that. "Ma'am, we still have to check. It's protocol." So I let them in. They scanned the apartment like they expected to find a hostage tied to a chair. My hands shook as I handed them the printed police report from the engagement dinner incident. Daniel had kept it ready just in case. That was the thing about living with someone who's trying to break your world apart from a distance. You start preparing for war in your own home. The older officer read the document, slowly nodding. "All right," he said finally. "We'll make a note." They left after a few more routine questions, but the sound of their boots in the hallway stayed with me long after the door closed. That was the first wellness check. The second came 3 days later, afternoon this time. I was working remotely halfway through a presentation when the doorbell rang. Same uniform, same tired look, same words. "Your mother called again." I could hear the doubt behind their politeness. Every call like this plants a seed. Even if they don't believe her entirely, they start to wonder. That's what she counted on. Not proof. Doubt. She wanted me to be the girl they thought might be trapped. She wanted the world to see her as the worried mother trying to save her daughter. The third time, she went further. She called anonymously. They told us later it came through a tip line. A young woman is being held against her will by a controlling man, the report said. I could almost hear her voice behind the words. This time they separated me from Daniel. One officer pulled me into the bedroom while the other spoke with him in the living room. "Do you feel safe here?" the officer asked. She wasn't unkind. She looked at me like she wanted to help. "Has he ever hurt you?" I shook my head, my throat tight. "No. My mother is making this up. She's been harassing me for months." I showed her the voicemails, the messages, the previous reports. She listened, but she still had to go through every question. When they left, Daniel stood by the window, jaw-tight, shoulders rigid. "She's turning our home into a stage," he said quietly. He was right. The neighbors had started to notice. Mrs. Ellis stopped making small talk in the hallway. The couple across the hall glanced at us with polite smiles that carried questions they were too afraid to ask. She was winning in small, insidious ways. She didn't need to touch me to make me feel trapped again. She just needed to plant enough suspicion so that I was never fully believed. A week later, Emily called late at night. I almost didn't answer, but I missed her voice. She whispered, "Mom says he's hurting you. She says she has proof." My heart squeezed. "What proof?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "She won't say, but she's crying to everyone. People believe her, Caro. They really believe her." There was something in Emily's voice I hadn't heard before. Doubt, not just in me, in the version of our mother she'd always trusted. "Emily," I said softly, "she's lying. You know she's lying." A long silence stretched between us. Then she whispered, "I want to believe you." I didn't push her. I couldn't. Margaret had spent her entire life building her image. I had only just begun to fight back. Another wellness check came the following week. By then, I had started expecting the knocks. The officers were polite but weary. They recognized our address now. They took their notes, offered half-hearted apologies, and left. Each visit chipped away at my sense of safety. I jumped at every sound in the hallway. I started sleeping with my phone on the nightstand, ready to record, ready to defend. Daniel tried to keep me grounded. He'd wrap his arm around me when the shaking started and whisper, She doesn't get to control this house. But we both knew she already was. Control didn't need walls or bars. It just needed a story that people were willing to listen to. She had learned that long ago. When we were kids, she didn't have to raise her voice to make people see her as a perfect mother. All she needed was the right tone, the right tears. And now she was using that same performance to build a case against me in the court of public opinion. I tried blocking her number. It didn't stop her. She called the police neighbors my workplace. She called anyone who would listen. The worst part wasn't the calls themselves. It was the waiting, the quiet before the next knock. It was walking through my own apartment like it wasn't mine anymore. I wasn't just defending myself from her lies. I was trying to hold on to the fragile world I had built after years of being under her thumb. And every time the doorbell rang, I could hear her voice even before the officer spoke. "She's mine." The morning of the wedding was quiet, almost unnaturally so. It was the kind of stillness that made every sound echo louder than it should. We hadn't planned a big ceremony, just a small courthouse wedding, a few close friends, and Emily. I hadn't wanted to invite her at first. Part of me still saw the way she held my shoulders down that night at the dinner table, but she had called a few weeks earlier, her voice soft, unsure. "I want to be there," she said. "I need to see." Something in me still holding on to the sister I used to know said yes. Daniel and I arrived early, walking through the metal detectors with the kind of nervousness that doesn't come from marriage but from knowing a storm might be waiting outside. The courthouse was old marble floors that made every footstep echo high ceilings that made the air colder. Daniel wore a simple suit. I wore a cream dress that reached just below my knees. No veil, no flowers, just something clean and quiet. That was how I wanted it to be. A beginning, not a performance. Our friends gathered in the hallway, chatting softly. Emily sat on a bench, fingers twisting the strap of her purse over and over. She looked tired, not just from the years under our mother, but from the cracks finally forming in the image she had clung to for so long. When the clerk called our names, my chest tightened. For a moment, everything felt still, like maybe, just maybe, the storm had passed us by. We followed the clerk into the small courtroom. The judge, a woman with kind eyes and silver hair, greeted us warmly. She didn't know about the history. She just saw two people ready to make a promise. That small mercy almost made me cry. Then the doors burst open. The sound was sharp, crashing against the marble like a shot. Every head turned. She walked in like she owned the place. Margaret. Dressed in her best church dress, the pale pink one with the matching pearls she only wore when she wanted to impress. Her lipstick was perfectly applied. Her hair curled. Her smile stretched wide and manic. Behind her was a man I didn't recognize at first. Broad shoulders, cheap suit, smug face. Brandon. She'd been talking about him for months without saying his name. A real man, she'd say. A man who understands what a woman should be. I had thought it was just talk. I was wrong. Emily stood up so fast her purse fell to the floor. "Mom," she whispered, but Margaret didn't hear her. Or didn't care. She marched straight down the aisle between the benches like it was her ceremony. Her voice carried through the room. "Stop this right now." She pointed at Daniel. "He's poisoned you. This isn't you." Security was already moving, two officers stepping forward, but she was faster. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging through the fabric of my dress, the same grip I had felt so many times before. Brandon stood just behind her, smiling like this was entertainment. "You don't have to do this, Caro," she said. Her voice softened, but her eyes were hard. "You can come home. You can marry someone who understands his place, not a man who lets you think you're in charge." I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. "Let go of me," I said quietly. She squeezed harder. "You're making a mistake." Daniel moved between us, his body like a wall. "Ma'am, you need to step back." One of the officers said, their tone firm. She jerked away from them like a wild thing. "She's not in her right mind," she screamed. "She's been brainwashed." Her voice bounced off the walls, filling every corner of the courtroom. For the first time, everyone saw her without the soft lighting of family gatherings. No pearls or church smiles could soften this. She looked unhinged. I could feel the stares from everyone, not pitying, not confused, but stunned. Brandon stepped forward, then voice oily. "Caro, your mom just wants what's best for you. She told me everything about how strong you used to be before he came along." I stared at him, at the stranger who thought he had a right to speak into my life because she had given him permission. Emily whispered something behind me, her voice shaking. "Mom, stop. Please." That was the first time I had ever heard her plead like that. Margaret turned on her eyes, sharp. "Don't you dare take her side," she hissed. That was when I saw it. A flicker, a crack in Emily's expression. The moment when love and obedience started to separate. The officers finally reached Margaret. She didn't go quietly. She shouted as they pulled her back. "She's mentally unstable. This isn't legal. You're all going to regret this." Her words echoed as the doors slammed behind her. The silence that followed was the kind that hums against your skin. I realized my hands were shaking. Daniel wrapped his fingers around mine, steady and warm. The judge, who had stood silently through the entire outburst, cleared her throat. "Would you like to continue?" she asked gently. I nodded. Because that was the thing about moments like these. They're not just endings. They're lines drawn in the ground. Margaret had tried to destroy my wedding to remind me that no matter how far I ran, she could still find me. But this time, she wasn't the only one speaking. Security escorted Brandon out too after he tried to argue with the officers about family rights. I didn't look at him again. The ceremony was short. The judge read the vows. Daniel's voice was steady. Mine shook at first, then found its rhythm. When she pronounced us married, I felt something inside me unclench. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was the beginning of it. Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp and cold. Emily wrapped her coat tighter around her shoulders. She looked at me like she was seeing me clearly for the first time. "She's not going to stop," she said softly. I nodded. "I know." Daniel placed his arm around me as we walked down the steps. Behind us, I could still hear the faint echo of Margaret's voice shouting somewhere in the hallway, but it was muffled now. Contained. For once, it didn't own the room. A local news crew that had been covering another case caught the tail end of the scene. Margaret screaming, the officers holding her back, Brandon's useless bluster. Someone filmed it. By that evening, the video was floating around Facebook, quietly shared among the same community she had built her reputation in for decades. Margaret Whitman, the woman who built her life around controlling the story, was finally on display without her mask. The calls started again that night, but they sounded different. Her voice was more frantic, less composed. "You humiliated me," she said through the phone. "You've destroyed your family." I didn't respond. I just hit record. That night, Emily texted me I saw her face when she realized no one believed her. It was the first time she's ever looked small. For the first time in my life, my mother's power wasn't absolute. It was just loud, and loud doesn't last forever. The night after the wedding crash, the apartment felt heavier than usual. The walls carried the weight of everything that had happened, the chaos she had dragged into what should have been one of the calmest days of my life. I sat on the edge of the couch, still wearing the cream dress, the fabric wrinkled my hair falling loose around my face. Daniel stood at the kitchen counter with a mug of tea in his hands, watching me carefully but giving me space. We didn't talk for a while. The silence wasn't cold. It was the kind of silence that wraps around two people who both know the ground has shifted beneath their feet. My phone was face down on the coffee table. I didn't need to look at it to know what waited there. More calls. More messages. Probably another storm from my mother. For years, I'd responded to those storms the same way. I'd shrink. I'd try to explain. I'd try to smooth things over. I'd pretend her cruelty was love. That night, sitting there with my body still trembling from the courthouse, I realized something had changed. She had crossed a line so public and so sharp that there was no pretending left to do. I picked up the phone, not to answer, but to scroll through the voicemail list, all the messages she had left. Some screaming, some soft, some crying, some praying. All of them filled with the same message: I belong to her. My hand stopped shaking. It wasn't rage that settled in. It was something quieter, heavier, steadier. Daniel sat down beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. "We can do something about this," he said softly. We don't have to keep letting her run the show. I let out a shaky breath. She's my mother, I whispered, and it sounded smaller than I wanted it to. She's not your jailer, he said. There's a difference. I stared at the screen at her voice, frozen in little audio files, each one a weapon wrapped in fake love. For years, I'd accepted this as a normal part of my life. Toxic mothers were supposed to be forgiven. Families were supposed to stay together no matter how much it hurt. But what she was doing now wasn't family. It was war. Daniel reached for my hand, grounding me the way he always did. We talked to a lawyer, he said. We build something real. You've got evidence, Caro. All of this. It's not just words. Evidence. That word felt strange in my mouth, but right. I'd spent my whole life proving myself to her, trying to get her to see me. Maybe it was time to stop proving and start fighting. I thought about the officers at our door, the whispers from the neighbors, the way the judge looked at us after she screamed in that courtroom. All of it painted a picture, and for once, it wasn't hers alone to control. I'm tired, I said. Not the kind of tired that a night's sleep can fix. The kind that seeps into your bones. Then let's end it, Daniel said. He didn't say it like a demand. He said it like an offer, like handing me back something I'd lost a long time ago. I nodded slowly. The decision didn't feel explosive. It didn't come with screaming or tears. It came like quiet steel sliding into place. I wasn't going to run anymore. I wasn't going to let her dictate my life through guilt and performance. She had spent decades building control around me like a cage. That night, I decided to take it apart piece by piece. The next morning, I called Emily. Her voice was tired, guarded. I know what she did at the wedding, she said before I could speak. People are talking. It's everywhere. I heard her breathing quick and uneven. I don't think I can pretend she's right anymore. That sentence hit me in a place I didn't know was still soft. I told her what I planned to do. The restraining order, the lawyer, the evidence. She didn't interrupt. She didn't promise to help. But she didn't hang up either. That was enough. When I hung up, Daniel already had a list of lawyers on his laptop. His practical steadiness was the opposite of her chaos. That was what made it work. I poured myself a cup of cold tea, stared out the kitchen window at the quiet Boston street, and for the first time in years, I felt something like control return to my hands. She had made me afraid my entire life. That fear was real, but fear and power aren't the same thing. She didn't own me just because she scared me. That was the night I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to fight back. Not just survive her, fight her. The first meeting with the lawyer felt strange, like stepping into a part of the world that had existed around me all along, but never for me. The office was quiet and smelled faintly of paper and coffee. The lawyer, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and calm movements, listened more than she spoke. Her name was Caroline Hale, and when she shook my hand, it was firm and steady. "I've read the summary your fiancé sent," she said, "but I want to hear it from you. All of it." It was the first time someone outside my circle of friends had asked me to tell the story as if it mattered. So I did. I told her about the phone calls, the wellness checks, the wedding crash, the messages, the years of control. I told her about the way Margaret could turn anyone into an audience. By the time I finished, her notepad was full of neat, tight handwriting. She tapped her pen lightly against the pad and said, "What you're describing is a clear pattern of harassment, emotional abuse, and attempted coercion. We can build a strong case." The words "strong case" didn't feel real yet. They felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else's life. She leaned forward. "The key is documentation. Everything you've been collecting already gives us leverage. We need to organize it, build a timeline, and file for a restraining order. Depending on her behavior, we can also pursue civil action." Daniel squeezed my hand under the table. He'd been quiet the whole time, letting me speak, letting me be the one to own the story. Caroline handed me a list. "This is what I'll need from you. All voicemails, texts, emails, copies of police reports, witness statements, and a personal written timeline. The more consistent and chronological this is, the harder it is for her to twist." I left that meeting with a folder full of instructions and something heavier than paper in my chest. Resolve. At home, we cleared the kitchen table. Daniel plugged in his laptop. I opened my phone, and we began piecing together years of quiet damage. The first file we uploaded was the audio from that night after the wedding. Her voice was sharp and furious, accusing me of humiliation, of betrayal. Caroline had said those moments mattered. They showed escalation. The next file was a stack of voicemails going back months. First came the sweet ones. "I just want to hear your voice, honey." Then the desperate ones. "I need you to call me back. I can't sleep." Then the angry ones. "You've chosen him over me. You've chosen wrong." And finally, the threats hidden in pretty words. "No one will believe you, Caro. They'll always believe a mother." Daniel organized the emails next. Some were long letters with Bible verses. Others were one-line accusations. She'd sent messages to my boss, my coworkers, neighbors, each one carefully designed to look like concern but laced with poison. Then came the wellness check reports. I hadn't realized how many there were until they were all in one folder. Officer names, dates, times. 3 in December, 2 in January, more in between. Each report showed no findings, but they told a story of someone trying to break down a door without touching it. Emily came over one evening to help. She sat quietly at the table, staring at the folders at the recordings. "I didn't know it was this bad," she whispered. Her hands twisted the edge of her sleeve the way she used to when we were kids, and Margaret made us recite prayers. "I knew she was calling, but I didn't know—" Her voice broke off. I didn't know how to answer her. There were no words for years of silence. She agreed to give a statement. It wouldn't be easy for her. She'd spent most of her life being the obedient one. But she looked at me with a kind of determination I hadn't seen in her before. "She's been doing this to both of us," she said softly. I just never had the courage to say it out loud. Caroline, the lawyer, set up a second meeting. This time it was just logistics. She explained the process step by step. "We'll file for an emergency restraining order first. That'll give you immediate legal protection if she tries to contact you directly again. Then we'll prepare for the hearing. I'll subpoena the police reports, compile the call records, and request statements from anyone impacted." I asked, "What about my workplace?" She smiled faintly. "They've already started their own file. HR has documented the calls, the disruptions. That will help us." My chest tightened. For years, her voice had followed me into every part of my life. And now that same voice was becoming evidence. It was terrifying and liberating at once. Caroline also warned me. "This will not make her stop right away. People like your mother don't respond to boundaries easily. This is going to be loud, but the law will be on your side." That night, Daniel and I lay in bed in the dark. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the pulse in my wrists. "What if she escalates?" I whispered. "She probably will," he answered honestly. That was one of the things I loved about him. He didn't make pretty promises, but this time she won't have the advantage. I thought about all the years she had been the only storyteller in the room. When she said something, people believed her because no one else spoke. Now, for the first time, I had my own story backed by proof. The next week was a blur of paperwork and signatures. Caroline's team cataloged every file and numbered them chronologically, 1 through 147. Every message, every voicemail, every report was a thread in the web she had spun. Only now the web was visible. HR sent over their official statement. They had logs of every call she had made to my workplace, every false accusation. When I read the words documented harassment, my hands shook. Not because it surprised me, because it made it real. This wasn't just something happening in my head. It wasn't just family drama. It was documented, provable harm. Emily recorded her statement at the lawyer's office. She spoke quietly at first, describing how Margaret had controlled every part of our childhood, how she had rewarded obedience and punished rebellion, how she had slowly turned her daughters into extensions of herself. But when she talked about the night of the engagement dinner, her voice cracked. I held her down. She whispered, tears running down her face. "I thought I was helping. I didn't know how to not obey." Caroline placed a box of tissues on the table and told her softly, "That moment matters." Emily's statement wasn't just evidence. It was the beginning of her stepping out of my mother's shadow, too. By the time we finished assembling everything, it was nearly midnight. The apartment was covered in folders, sticky notes, USB drives. I stood there in the middle of it all, exhausted but steadier than I'd ever felt. Margaret had spent my entire life controlling the narrative. For the first time, the story wasn't hers to tell. It was mine. And soon, it would be the court's. The courthouse on the morning of the hearing was colder than I expected. The winter air cut through the cracks in the heavy doors, and the marble floors made every sound echo like a warning. I wore a navy suit borrowed from a friend, one that made me feel steadier than I actually was. Daniel held my hand as we walked through security, his grip warm and steady. Emily walked beside me silent, but there. Just having her there mattered more than I could say. The courtroom itself was smaller than I imagined. Wooden benches, a raised judge's bench, 2 tables, one for us, one for her. Margaret was already there when we entered. She sat at her table with her lawyer, her hair perfectly curled, pearl earrings glinting under the fluorescent lights. She wore the same pink church dress she had worn the day she crashed my wedding. It wasn't a coincidence. It was armor. She looked at me with that same calm smile she always wore in public, the smile that had fooled everyone for years. But there was something different now. Her eyes, they weren't calm. They were sharp and restless. Her lawyer, a gray-haired man with a too-slick smile, leaned close to whisper something. She nodded, keeping her gaze locked on me. I sat down at our table. Caroline Hale, our lawyer, opened her folder and organized the evidence like she'd done this 1,000 times before. She didn't speak much to me, just gave a slight nod that said, "I've got this." Daniel placed a hand on my knee under the table. Emily sat behind me in the gallery, a tissue crumpled in her hand. The bailiff called the court to order. The judge, a woman with dark eyes and an expression carved from years of seeing too much, took her seat. She read through the docket, her voice calm and even. Then she said our names. The case began. Caroline started first. Her voice was low, steady, deliberate. She walked through the timeline like she was building a bridge brick by brick. "This is a case about harassment," she said. "It is about a pattern of control, escalation, and emotional harm that has spilled beyond the private walls of a family home and into workplaces, neighborhoods, and public institutions." She introduced the exhibits one by one. The voicemails, the emails, the police reports, the wellness checks, the wedding video. Each piece was like a stone laid at Margaret's feet. Margaret sat still, hands folded in her lap like a perfect picture of maternal suffering. She knew how to play this role. She had spent her entire life rehearsing it. When the first voicemail was played, the one where she said, "You're mine," there was a slight stir in the courtroom. The words filled the room. Her voice, once a private storm, became something undeniable. The judge leaned forward slightly. Caroline didn't stop. She layered the evidence carefully. "These are not isolated incidents," she said. "This is a clear, sustained campaign of harassment designed to undermine my client's personal safety, professional reputation, and autonomy." Then it was their turn. Her lawyer rose, buttoned his jacket, and approached the bench with practiced confidence. "Your Honor," he began, "this is not harassment. This is a mother trying to save her daughter from a dangerous situation. My client was acting out of love and fear. She believed her daughter was being controlled by an abusive partner and did what any concerned parent would do." I felt my jaw tighten. That was their story. It was always their story. Margaret's face was serene as he spoke. She even dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. When she took the stand, she did it with the grace of a woman who had spent her whole life performing. "I love my daughter," she said. "I only wanted to protect her." She stopped talking to me. She isolated herself. She wouldn't let me in. I thought something terrible was happening to her. What else could I do but try to save her? Her voice cracked at all the right places. She painted herself as the victim. She talked about sleepless nights, worried prayers, about how she'd raised me alone, about how I'd changed since meeting Daniel. The people in the gallery watched quietly. I could feel the weight of their eyes, the way they were trying to decide which story to believe. Then Caroline stood. "Mrs. Whitman," she said evenly, "do you recall calling your daughter's workplace on November 3rd? Margaret blinked. "I was worried about her." "Yes or no?" Caroline pressed. "Yes," Margaret said softly. "And again on November 5th. Yes." "And November 12th? Margaret hesitated but nodded. Carolyn picked up a stack of papers. Each one of those calls has been documented as an unfounded report. HR records confirm multiple disruptions caused by your claims. She moved on. Do you recall calling the police for wellness checks 5 separate times between December and February? Margaret lifted her chin. Because I was afraid. Yet each time, Caroline said the officers found no signs of abuse. They found your daughter safe unharmed and told you to stop making false reports. Correct. Margaret's smile faltered. I didn't know what else to do. Caroline's voice stayed calm. You didn't know what else to do but harass your daughter through her workplace, her neighbors, her home, and her wedding day. Margaret tried to cry then, tried to twist the story back to her, but Caroline pressed play on the wedding video. The sound of Margaret screaming filled the courtroom. She's not in her right mind. She's been brainwashed. Her voice was wild, her body thrashing against the officers who tried to remove her. It was all there. Every word, every gesture. For the first time, I watched her lose control in front of people who wouldn't look away. The mask she had worn so carefully all these years cracked under the weight of her own voice. When the video ended, the courtroom was silent. Even her lawyer looked unsettled. The judge scribbled something on her notes. Then Caroline called the witnesses. My boss testified first. He spoke carefully, explaining the disruption the calls had caused, the unnecessary investigations, the emotional toll it had taken on the team. Mrs. Ellis, my neighbor, testified next. She explained how Margaret had contacted her multiple times, crying, spinning stories about Daniel keeping me locked away. She looked at me with an apology in her eyes. She had believed her, at least at first. Then came Emily. She walked to the stand like she was carrying something heavy. She sat down, hands folded in her lap, just like Margaret used to make us do. But her voice wasn't soft. Not anymore. My mother controlled everything she said. Our clothes, our words, our friends. Everything. I believed it for a long time. I thought it was love, but it wasn't. She talked about the way Margaret turned her daughters into mirrors of herself, about how she rewarded obedience and punished independence. Then she told them about the engagement dinner, how she held my shoulders down while Margaret tried to rip the ring off my swollen finger. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. I thought I was helping her, Emily whispered. I thought I was doing the right thing because that's what she taught me. But it was wrong. Margaret shifted uncomfortably at the table. The cracks widened. The judge leaned back in her chair, watching. Caroline asked one last question. Why are you testifying today? Emily swallowed hard. Because I can't let her keep hurting her, or anyone else. Not anymore. By the time she left the stand, Margaret's mask had crumbled entirely. Her jaw clenched. Her hands shook. She tried to interrupt, but the judge shut her down with a single sharp glance. Finally, it was my turn. My heart pounded as I walked to the stand. The air felt thick, like it was pressing against my skin. I took the oath, sat down, and looked at my mother. For the first time, I didn't look away. Caroline guided me through the timeline gently. The calls, the wellness checks, the harassment. I spoke clearly, not because I wasn't afraid, but because I was done letting fear speak for me. When it was her lawyer's turn to cross-examine, he tried to twist everything back. Don't you think he said that your mother was just trying to help? I held his gaze. No, I said. She wasn't trying to help. She was trying to control me, just like she always has. He tried to bring up family loyalty, religion, expectations. I didn't flinch. Every question he threw at me, I answered with facts, not emotion. Facts. That was what they couldn't twist. When I stepped down, my hands were shaking, but my spine was straight. The closing statements were quiet. Caroline didn't need to shout. The evidence had already spoken louder than any speech could. Margaret's lawyer talked about love, about fear, about mothers trying to protect their daughters. But it sounded thin now. Hollow. When the judge finally spoke, the room felt like it was holding its breath. This court has heard enough to determine a clear and sustained pattern of harassment, she said. The evidence is overwhelming. The respondent's claims of concern do not justify the documented actions taken against the petitioner. Her voice was steady, final. She granted the restraining order. 10 years. Immediate enforcement. Margaret was ordered to stay away from me, Daniel, and Emily. She was found guilty on multiple counts of harassment and making false reports. She was sentenced to probation, mandatory counseling, and restitution for damages caused. The sound that left Margaret's throat when the gavel came down wasn't a scream. It was a low, guttural sound of someone realizing their story no longer controlled the room. She didn't look at me as they led her out. She looked past me like I was something she could no longer shape. I sat there in silence, the noise of the courtroom fading around me. Daniel's hand found mine. Emily exhaled shakily behind me. For the first time, I felt the weight shift. For the first time, her voice wasn't the one that decided the ending. The sound of the gavel still echoed in my ears long after the courtroom emptied. It wasn't loud anymore, but it had weight, a clean, irreversible sound that cut through years of being silenced. Margaret was escorted out the side door by 2 deputies, her wrists cuffed in front of her. She didn't look back. The pink church dress she had worn like a costume all these years suddenly looked like nothing more than fabric. The mask she had built, brick by manipulative brick, had finally crumbled in a room where truth mattered more than performance. I stood in the hallway outside the courtroom with Daniel's hand steady around mine. Emily leaned against the wall, clutching her purse, tears running down her face, not from grief, but from something closer to release. For the first time in years, the air felt breathable. Caroline Hale, our lawyer, came out after a few minutes with the final paperwork. "It's done," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. "Restraining order for 10 years probation, mandatory counseling, restitution. It's everything we asked for." I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. She handed me the documents. They felt heavier than paper. They were the proof that Margaret's voice no longer ruled my life. "This doesn't erase what she did," Caroline added, "but it gives you space to live without looking over your shoulder." That sentence landed like a stone in my chest. Space to live. It had always felt like something other people got to have, not me. As people filed out of the building, I caught a few of them glancing at me. Some were neighbors who'd believed her stories at first. Some were people from church who had seen her perform her role as the perfect mother. Now they had watched her unravel under the weight of her own words. Their looks weren't full of pity. They were full of quiet realization. Margaret's version of me had died in that courtroom, and so had her ability to write my story for anyone else. Outside, the cold air hit my face like a wake-up call. Daniel wrapped his coat around my shoulders. Emily walked beside us in silence. I could still see flashes of everything in my mind, the judge's expression, Margaret's broken performance, Emily's testimony, Daniel's steady presence. For years, she had trained me to believe she was unbreakable. But that day, I saw her break. That image would stay with me forever, not because I loved watching her fall, but because it reminded me that control was just smoke. It only worked if I kept breathing it in. We went home that afternoon and sat in the living room without saying much. There were no fireworks, no big celebrations, just a quiet stillness that felt unfamiliar. The TV was off. My phone didn't ring. For the first time in years, I didn't brace myself for her voice to break through. Emily sat on the armchair across from me, her eyes red. "She's really gone," she whispered. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, she is. She can't come near us," Daniel added. "Not legally, not anymore." But even with the papers signed and sealed, there was a strange emptiness under the relief. Because when someone has controlled every inch of your life for so long, their absence is loud too. That night, as I lay in bed with Daniel, I stared at the ceiling and let my mind replay everything. The dinner, the calls, the wellness checks, the courtroom, all the pieces that had led us here. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. That was new. The next few weeks moved slowly. People who had once believed her started avoiding eye contact when we passed each other on the street. A few apologized quietly. Mrs. Ellis came by one afternoon with a small tin of cookies and shaky hands. "I'm sorry," she said. "I thought she was just worried. I didn't know. I didn't give her a speech. I just nodded. I understood. Margaret had fooled me too for most of my life." The church stopped calling. The workplace HR sent an official statement clearing my record of any concern. The whispers faded. The constant buzzing in my head quieted. Margaret still existed, but she no longer lived inside my walls. Emily started therapy a week after the verdict. She told me she needed to untangle the years of being molded into what our mother wanted. She told me it was time to find out who she was without Margaret's shadow hanging over her. I supported her. We had both been her daughters, but we had worn different chains. Daniel kept me grounded. He didn't push me to move on fast. He understood that healing from someone like Margaret isn't a clean cut. It's a slow peeling away of layers, some soft, some jagged. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail with no return address. I didn't have to open it to know who it was from. Margaret's handwriting was sharp and neat, just like when she used to leave notes on the fridge telling me what I'd done wrong that day. Daniel watched me as I held the envelope. My hands didn't shake. Not this time. I walked to the kitchen, turned on the stove, and held the corner of the envelope to the flame. It burned slowly, curling in on itself, blackening to ash. I dropped it into the sink and watched the smoke drift away. There was a time when a letter like that would have sent me spiraling. Now it was just paper. The house grew quieter in the weeks after the trial, but it wasn't the oppressive silence of living under her control. It was a silence I chose. A silence that belonged to me. Daniel and I talked about moving not to run away, but to start something new. A home that didn't hold her ghost in its corners. Emily came over every Sunday, and for the first time, our conversations weren't whispered around the edges of our mother's moods. We talked about books work cooking nothing extraordinary, but the ordinary felt extraordinary to us. Margaret was required to attend counseling as part of her probation. I didn't follow the updates. I didn't need to. Her life no longer intersected with mine. One night, Daniel asked me, "Do you regret taking her to court?" I looked at him surprised by how easily the answer came. No. I regret waiting this long. For so many years, I believed family meant endurance, that love meant sacrificing my peace for someone else's control. But that courtroom taught me something different. Family isn't the person who hurts you and calls it love. It's the people who stand beside you when you finally choose yourself. It's the people who help you build the quiet after the storm. And when I thought of Margaret now, I didn't feel fear. I didn't even feel rage. I felt distance, real distance, the kind that no guilt trip or manipulative phone call could close. For the first time, her story wasn't mine to carry anymore. Spring came late that year. Boston always seemed to take its time shaking off the cold, as if the city itself needed convincing to let go of winter. But when it did, it wasn't loud. It came in soft waves. Light that lingered longer in the evenings, trees that slowly stretched out into green, a wind that didn't bite anymore, and somehow the quiet outside started to mirror the quiet inside me. Months had passed since the verdict. Margaret hadn't tried to contact me again, not directly. I knew she was out there somewhere orbiting around the edges of a life that no longer belonged to her. But the distance wasn't frightening. It was clean. I had spent years living with the expectation that she'd always find a way back in that control, would always wear her face. But she hadn't. The restraining order wasn't magic, but it was a line. And for once, she had no power to cross it. I woke up early most mornings now. No more jolting awake to the sound of a phone vibrating with her voice waiting on the other side. I made coffee without checking the front door twice. I opened my curtains. I let light in. Daniel and I found a small house on the edge of the city, not too far from where we were, but just far enough to breathe differently. It wasn't big or fancy. It was ours. Every corner felt like a choice we made together, not a space carved out under someone else's shadow. The first night there, I stood on the porch barefoot looking up at the stars. Daniel came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my shoulders. For the first time in my life, the silence around me didn't feel dangerous. It felt earned. Emily came over often. Therapy had changed the way she spoke, the way she held herself. There was less weight in her shoulders, less apology in her smile. One afternoon, as we were painting the kitchen cabinets, she looked at me and said, "I didn't know life could be this quiet." I laughed softly, dipping my brush in paint. Me neither. We didn't talk about Margaret much anymore. She was a fact now, not a storm. We both knew she'd never change who she was. But we also knew we didn't have to live inside her gravity anymore. Emily was slowly building a life of her own, too. She'd applied to graduate school, something she never dared to do while Margaret still dictated her choices. I watched her step into herself with a quiet pride that didn't need to be spoken. One Saturday morning, I received an invitation in the mail from our old church. It wasn't from Margaret, just a generic letter. I stared at it for a long time before folding it in half and tossing it into the recycling bin. That place wasn't mine anymore. It had never been mine. I spent so much of my life thinking my identity was something she defined. But standing there in my own kitchen with paint on my hands and the smell of coffee drifting through the air, I realized she didn't define me anymore. She never really had. She'd just convinced me she did. Sometimes at night, I still thought about the courtroom. Not about the gavel or the verdict, but about that moment when she looked at me and realized she couldn't touch me anymore. I carried that moment like a small stone in my pocket, not heavy, but solid. A reminder. Daniel and I held a small wedding celebration months after everything ended. Nothing grand. Just a backyard dinner with a few close friends, Emily, and laughter that didn't have to fight to exist. There were no speeches about family loyalty, no performances, just a group of people who loved without strings. When we exchanged vows again under the soft light of spring, I didn't tremble this time. I felt rooted. Later that night, as the last of the guests left and the candles burned low, I sat alone on the porch. The air smelled like grass and the faint sweetness of the cake Daniel had insisted on baking himself. The wind brushed against my face. And in that stillness, I understood something I hadn't before. Freedom doesn't come with a single moment. It isn't the gavel or the paperwork or even the silence after. It's 1,000 small breaths that don't belong to anyone else. It's being able to sit with yourself and not hear their voice in your head anymore. Emily joined me on the porch, leaning against the railing. "Do you ever think about her?" she asked softly. I didn't lie. "Yes, but it's different now." She nodded slowly. "Me too." We sat there for a long time, not needing to fill the air with anything else. Margaret would always be a part of the story, but she wasn't the author anymore. I was. The night ended quietly, the stars above sharp and bright. I went to bed with Daniel's arms around me, the house wrapped in the kind of silence I'd once thought I'd never know. The kind of silence that isn't about fear. The kind that means safety. The kind that means I have reclaimed my life. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight poured through the window. I made coffee. I stepped out onto the porch. I breathed in the air. And for the first time in my life, I didn't wonder what she would do next. I just existed. I was finally free. When Caro stepped onto that porch and breathed in the quiet air, it wasn't just the end of a battle. It was the beginning of a life that finally belonged to her. After years of living under someone else's control, after Whisper's wellness checks, courtroom walls, and a lifetime of shrinking herself to survive, she finally got to exhale without fear. That moment isn't just hers. It's for anyone who has ever stood in a dark kitchen clutching their chest while someone else's voice tried to tell them who they were allowed to be. Maybe as you listened to her story, something in it felt familiar. Maybe you know what it's like to walk on eggshells in your own home. Maybe you've had someone in your life who used love like a weapon control, like a language guilt, like a leash. And maybe, like Caro, you've wondered if you'd ever feel peace again. If that's you, I want you to hear this clearly. You matter. Your story matters. And no one, no parent, no partner, no family member has the right to own you. Not your voice, not your choices, not your life. The world can be loud when someone like Margaret tries to rewrite your truth. It can make you doubt your memory, your strength, your worth. But the moment you choose yourself, the moment you say enough, everything starts to shift. Maybe slowly, maybe painfully, but it shifts. And if right now you're still in that storm, still standing on the edge of choosing yourself, I want you to know you're not alone. Thousands of people around the world have walked that same hard road. They've heard the same threats. They've felt the same guilt. And they've found their way out. Caro's story isn't just a story of a courtroom verdict. It's about reclaiming breath space and quiet after years of noise. It's about turning a house that felt like a cage into a home filled with light. It's about saying no and not apologizing for it. So I want to ask you, Have you ever had to choose yourself over someone who tried to control your life? Have you ever felt that first breath of freedom? What did it look like for you? Or maybe you're still standing at the threshold, afraid to take that step. If you are, tell your story in the comments. You might not know it yet, but your voice could be the one someone else needs to hear tonight. Your words could be the spark that helps another person believe it's possible. And if no one has told you this today, let me be the one. You are not weak for being hurt. You are not broken for taking time to heal. And you are not selfish for choosing peace. Family is not the person who breaks you and calls it love. Family is the people who stand beside you when you finally choose yourself. If you believe that stories like Caro's deserve to be heard, if you believe no one should have to walk through that kind of darkness alone, then share your thoughts below, like this video, and subscribe for more real stories of justice, survival, and freedom. This isn't just a channel. It's a place where voices that were silenced for too long finally get to be heard, where people who've endured too much finally get to breathe. So tell us, where are you listening from tonight, and what would freedom mean to you? You're not alone. Not anymore.